Hi everyone, I wanted to talk to you about Chapter 8, or Safety Management. We start off the chapter with new lingo, if you will. Instead of accidents, they are now referred to as unintentional injury. And they want to make it clear in this instance that most of the factors leading up to an unintentional injury are preventable. And it goes on to discuss that teachers and administrators have a major role in responding to unintentional injuries and creating safe environments. Of course, it's a very daunting task indeed, and we have to give careful consideration to our safety management in our programs. I want to draw your attention to page 208 regarding some of the conditions that contribute to unintentional injury, and one of them cites new teachers and staff and visitors as attributing to unintentional injury. So remember when we talked about how your staff can be 18 years of age and have no formal training in early childhood, and they can be a high school graduate, pass a background check, but they can still come and be employed in your program with no prerequisite training. So this is where it is imperative as a manager that you have that solid training program and that you are not putting your staff in a position where they fail because they are not administering the proper amount of supervision. Also, this talks about visitors in your program and how that can be distracting. And I'm glad it's in the book because I wanted to talk to you about this previously, but I thought, well, I didn't want to go off on a tangent about it, but just beware that visitors to your program, that does pose a distraction with respect to what you're doing. And in one situation in Denver, some religious schools were put on high alert because some individuals were asking a lot of questions and wanting to tour the program at a synagogue for their day school. And they really had no business or reason to be asking such questions because they didn't have children, for one thing. So if you don't have children in a program, then you really, having a tour of that program just is not warranted. So, it's fine for you to be selective about who you allow to tour your program. They have to have a solid reason. What if someone wants to tour your program for a friend who is involved in a custody-related issue and they're asking questions or assessing the security of your program? Be cautious about that. You don't have to grant a tour to someone just because they ask to have one. And this chapter talks about inclement weather again, posing a risk for children not being able to play outdoors. So I would say to you, what is your plan in case of inclement weather? What are you going to do? I mean, I guess it would be wonderful if we all had a gym in our program so we could play in the gym when we can't go outside. But that probably isn't the scenario. So what teachers can do to plan for that is to create an environment inside that looks completely different than what it does throughout the course of the day. So maybe they're going to move the tables and chairs around to allow for gross motor movement. And it's not going to be just random. It's going to be a planned activity. And then you're going to send that clear visual cue when that is over and done with, that now we're going back to the safety rules that we follow all the time. We're moving the tables and the chairs back. We're no longer running in the classroom, and we're going to go back to business as usual. Also, it talks about, we have that rule about not running in the classroom, and then maybe you're going to talk to the children about running when they're outside. How many laps are you going to do on the playground? How fast do you think you're going to be able to run? How many times do you think you're going to be able to run around the playground before you need to stop and rest? And kind of redirecting their behavior that way. Another common misbehavior in the classroom is children don't want to clean up. So teachers may struggle with this. So maybe where you could start with this is going back and looking at your space to see how organized it is. Is it really very clear where toys go, or they're supposed to go, when you're cleaning up? Have you shown the children this? Do they know how to clean up? Are you part of that process? Or are you as a teacher just saying it's time to clean up and expecting them to clean up without any real guidance from you? So then that can be problematic as well. I had a 1-year-old teacher who was masterful with cleanup. She loved that cooking show with, I can never say his name appropriately, Emerald, the one that likes to take the things and say bam. So what she would do with the children is that she would carry around the bins of toys, and she would hold out a bin to a child that had a toy, and she would hold it out and they'd throw it in and she'd say bam, and they say bam, and then the children were just delighted with this. They were smiling while they're cleaning up, and then they got to a point where they didn't necessarily need Cynthia to facilitate all of this. They knew when it was time to clean up that they could take their toy and go bam into the bin where it went. So I thought that was pretty masterful for a 1-year-old classroom, the way that she taught them that cleaning up can be fun and that things go in a certain place. And I would also, caution you about having too many toys out at once. That really leads to confusion about where things go when it's time to clean up. So I want to talk to you next about a checklist of examples of appropriate toy choices on page 214. So you have the different age groups: infants, toddlers, and preschoolers. For preschoolers, I feel that that's a pretty solid list and agree with everything on there. With toddlers, pool and riding toys. Well, if you're a toddler, who doesn't appreciate a good pool toy? Of course they like the pool toys. I would just caution you on how long the strings are on your pool toys. You may want to consider cutting them so they are not a strangulation issue. But your best bet really is to get some plastic tubing and cover those strings with it. And that way they are no longer a strangulation hazard. With infants, everything on that list is good, with the exception of washable stuffed animals. Those soft toys can pose a suffocation hazard, so I would really question having those in your infant classroom. I know that we did not have any in our programs for that reason, so just be cautious of that. And two, infants really love to put things in their mouths, so you're going to be washing a great deal of stuffed animals with a high frequency, so I think it poses too much of a hazard to have those in the classroom. It's the same as having a blanket that could potentially bunch up around an infant's face who is on their stomach for tummy time. We know what a hazard that is from the article that I included a couple of weeks ago about baby Santino and what happened to him while in group care in an Army facility. So next I want to talk to you about planning for natural disasters. So your planning, just be mindful that not all disasters will warrant the same action on your behalf. I managed one program, for instance, where we had 2 buildings, and one of the buildings was in a flood zone. It sat down the hill from a dam. So our plan was that if the dam broke, they knew that we had 20 minutes to vacate this building. And of course, it was the building with the most children in it. It had 280 children in it to evacuate, including infants. So the plan was, if the dam broke, that we have our 20 minutes. We're notified that we have to evacuate this building. We're going to go to our second building, which sits up on a hill. And the plan was that a bus would come pick us up. Now, we're not going to have consideration to loading children on with car seats because this is an emergency. We're just going to get loaded onto the bus and be transported up the hill to our other facility. So my take on this was always, what if the bus doesn't show up? What if the buses on this particular day when the dam breaks, what if they are off of the installation being repaired? What if there are no buses to come? And then secondly, what if law enforcement blocks the road to our facility and the buses can't reach us? So then what do we do? I would have the teachers think about this. What is your plan? 2 teachers work in each classroom. I drive a Tahoe, you drive a Mini Cooper. Whose car are we going to take with all these children in it to go up to the other child development center? That's how I wanted them to be thinking. We also had a cargo van that was parked near our one and only preschool classroom for this particular building. So my thought is that the cook was going to drive that cargo van with that entire classroom of children to go up to the other facility. Now, you may not need to plan for a flood in some of your installations, but it's going to depend on where you are and what the threats are, the sort of disaster preparedness plans that you are going to have to draw up and take into consideration. If, for instance, you have to leave your facility and go to another facility, you need to coordinate that with the other facility before you just show up. They need to be expecting you in case of an emergency. Also, we had a plan on where we would go in case of a fire, not a fire in the building, but a forest fire on the land around us. So we would be going to an adjacent facility if that happened. We also had a plan for active shooter, and I would recommend that any program have a plan for this. What if someone comes into your program that is armed? Well, you've got a couple of choices. What you're taught to do as an individual is that you can either choose to fight or run. So your children, clearly, they can't fight, and if you have them leave the facility, then you're just creating a bunch of little targets for someone to open fire on. So the way we drilled for this is that we had the active shooter scenario, and everyone would go into the closet with their children and hide and take shelter until they were given word that it was safe for them to come out. So the last thing I wanted to talk to you about, before I read this chapter, unbeknownst to me, I looked at the title of it, and I knew that I wanted to talk to you about children being left alone in vehicles, being unattended in vehicles where the adults forgot about them. The children perished as a result of that. So unbeknownst to me, on page 221, you have that tragic example of how a 2-year-old child was left in a van all day and as a result died from heat stroke. And I'm sure you've probably watched the YouTube video that I put into the media gallery where the sheriff was giving a briefing on a situation that had occurred at a Houston daycare. It sounds so similar to the event in the book where they had gone on a trip, they came back, and they did not check the van as they should have. So it makes me wonder about society and where our minds are. What are we thinking of? In our programs, if a child had not shown up by 9 o'clock that day, we were required to call the parent to see where they were, to see if they were safe, to determine if maybe they had left a child unattended in the car. That's why we had to call. I'm just going to be honest with you. We didn't want that to happen, and we had to add that added measure into our program every day. A couple of weekends ago, I test drove a car. I didn't even test drive it. I just sat in it. It was an Escalade, Cadillac Escalade. It was quite nice. I didn't buy it. But as we were getting out of the car, I looked at the dashboard, and this message came up. It said, check back seat. And the salesman said, oh yeah, that's on there in case you forget your purse or your groceries in the back seat. I said, no, I don't think that's why it's there. I think it's there to remind me in case I forget my child in the back seat. And I think that that is a sad state of affairs, that we recognize that it is a potential hazard, that could happen, but it's something that we also must be mindful of. We all want to think that it won't happen on our watch. I sincerely hope that it doesn't happen on your watch, but I think we need to be prepared for it and take all the preventive measures necessary that we can possibly take. So I'll leave you with that. Hope you have a good week.